The ring that broke everything. A family betrayal exposed. Some betrayals cut so deep, they change the very foundation of who you thought you were. I never imagined those words would define my life until the night I discovered my husband had given away the most precious symbol of our love, my engagement ring, to his sister like it was some cheap trinket from a dollar store. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it all began, and how it all came crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. Hi, I'm Celeste. And this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people closest to you can be the ones holding the sharpest knives. It was a Tuesday evening in late October when my world tilted off its axis. The autumn leaves were painting the neighborhood in shades of amber and crimson, creating a deceptively peaceful backdrop for what would become the most devastating discovery of my marriage. I had been looking for my engagement ring for 3 days, turning our house upside down in an increasingly frantic search that left me questioning my own sanity. The ring wasn't just any piece of jewelry. It was a stunning vintage Art Deco piece from the 1920s, featuring a brilliant 2-carat diamond surrounded by delicate sapphires in an intricate platinum setting. More importantly, it had belonged to my grandmother, Rose, who had passed it down to me with tears in her eyes and stories of enduring love. When my husband Daniel proposed with it 3 years ago, I thought it was the perfect symbol of our future together. Something old, something precious, something that connected our love to generations past. But that Tuesday evening, as I sat on our bedroom floor surrounded by overturned drawers and scattered jewelry boxes, Daniel walked in with an expression I'd never seen before. His usually warm brown eyes held a flicker of something that made my stomach clench. Guilt, maybe, or fear. He stood in the doorway, running his hands through his dark hair in that nervous gesture I'd come to know so well over our 4 years together. "Celeste," he began, his voice oddly strained. "We need to talk." The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. In my experience, conversations that started with, "We need to talk," never ended well. I looked up at him from where I sat surrounded by the chaos of my desperate search, and something cold settled in my chest. "About what?" I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Daniel closed the door behind him and leaned against it, as if he needed the physical support. "About your ring." My heart stopped. "You know where it is." The silence stretched between us for what felt like an eternity. Outside, I could hear children playing in the street, their laughter a stark contrast to the suffocating tension in our bedroom. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "I gave it to Melody." For a moment, I couldn't process what he'd said. The words seemed to bounce off my brain like rain off a windshield. Melody was his younger sister, 25 years old with a penchant for drama, and an unsettling habit of treating Daniel more like a boyfriend than a brother. She'd never particularly liked me, making snide comments about my job as a high school English teacher and my boring personality at family gatherings. "You gave it to who?" I whispered, certain I'd misheard. "Melody. She's been going through a rough time with her breakup, and she saw the ring sitting on your dresser last week when we had dinner here. She mentioned how beautiful it was, how it would make her feel better to have something so gorgeous, and I just..." He trailed off, his hands gesturing helplessly. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for him to tell me this was some elaborate joke. But the guilty expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. My husband, the man who had promised to love, honor, and cherish me, had given away my grandmother's engagement ring because his sister was having boy troubles. "You gave away my grandmother's ring," I said, each word precise and sharp as broken glass. "The ring that has been in my family for 3 generations. The ring you proposed with. You gave it to your sister because she was sad about a breakup." Daniel winced at the ice in my voice. "Celeste, please understand." "Understand what?" I stood up so quickly that jewelry scattered across the hardwood floor with tiny metallic chimes. "Understand that you stole my family heirloom and gave it away without asking me. Understand that you violated every boundary of trust and respect in our marriage." "What exactly am I supposed to understand, Daniel?" He stepped toward me, his hands raised in a placating gesture that only fueled my rage. "It's just a ring, honey. We can buy you a new one." The slap echoed through the room before I even realized I'd raised my hand. Daniel's head snapped to the side, his cheek blooming red under my palm print. We both stood there in shocked silence, breathing hard. Just a ring. My voice came out as a whisper, but it carried more venom than any shout. That ring represented our commitment, Daniel. It was my grandmother's dying wish that I wear it when I got married. It was the physical manifestation of every promise you made to me. And you called it just a ring. Tears were streaming down my face now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated fury. Where is she? Where is Melody? Daniel's face went pale. Celeste, don't do anything rash. Rash. I laughed, but it was a sound devoid of any humor. Rash would have been what I did the moment you told me. This is calculated. Where? She. She's at Mom and Dad's house. The whole family's there for dinner, but Celeste. I was already moving, grabbing my car keys from the dresser and heading for the door. Daniel caught my arm as I passed him. Please let me handle this. Let me talk to her privately. I turned to face him, and whatever he saw in my eyes made him immediately drop his hand. You've handled quite enough, Daniel. You made your choice when you gave away my ring. Now I'm making mine. The 20-minute drive to Daniel's parents' house passed in a blur of autumn scenery and mounting rage. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples. The radio was playing some cheerful pop song that seemed to mock the storm raging inside me. As I drove, memories flashed through my mind like a horrible slideshow. Melody at our wedding, making comments about how she could have planned it better. Melody at Christmas dinner, wearing my sweater that she'd borrowed and somehow never returned. Melody at my birthday party, flirting with my male co-workers and drawing attention away from me at every opportunity. But this wasn't about borrowing clothes or seeking attention. This was about my husband choosing his sister's temporary comfort over our marriage vows. This was about the systematic erosion of boundaries that I'd been too blind or too polite to address before now. My phone buzzed with text after text from Daniel. Please don't do this. Come back and we'll figure it out together. You're going to regret this. The last message made me laugh bitterly. I was going to regret this. What about his regrets? What about regretting the moment he decided his wife's feelings were less important than his sister's whims? As I pulled into the familiar driveway of the Morrison family home, I could see warm light spilling from the windows. Through the large bay window in the living room, I could make out the silhouettes of Daniel's family gathered around the dinner table. It looked like a Norman Rockwell painting, the picture of domestic bliss and family harmony. Too bad they were about to get a very rude awakening. I didn't knock. After 4 years of marriage and countless family dinners, I'd long ago been given the privilege of walking into the Morrison house like it was my own home. Tonight that familiarity would work to my advantage. The front door opened onto the main hallway, and I could hear the comfortable murmur of family conversation drifting from the dining room. Daniel's mother, Patricia, was laughing at something, her voice warm and melodic. His father, Robert, was telling what sounded like one of his endless work stories about difficult clients at his law firm. I stood in that hallway for a moment, listening to the soundtrack of the life I thought I'd married into. These people had welcomed me with open arms when Daniel first brought me home. Patricia had taught me her secret recipe for apple pie. Robert had walked me down the aisle at our wedding because my own father had passed away 2 years earlier. They'd become the family I'd never really had. And now I was about to blow their perfect little world apart. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward the dining room. As I rounded the corner, the scene unfolded before me like a twisted tableau. Daniel's parents sat at either end of their mahogany dining table, which was set with Patricia's good china and adorned with a beautiful fall centerpiece. Daniel's younger brother Marcus was there with his wife, Jennifer, and their toddler Emma, who was making a delightful mess with her mashed potatoes. And there, sitting in what should have been my chair, was Melody. She was more beautiful than ever, her long auburn hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders, her green eyes bright with laughter. She wore an elegant black dress that probably cost more than I made in a week, and her nails were perfectly manicured in a deep burgundy that matched her lipstick. But it was what she wore on her left hand that made my blood turn to ice. My grandmother's ring caught the light from the chandelier above the table, the diamond and sapphires sparkling like captured stars. Melody was holding up her hand, showing it off to the family like she was a newly engaged woman displaying her prize. "It's absolutely stunning, isn't it?" she was saying, her voice pitched in that little girl tone she used when she wanted something. "I've never owned anything so beautiful. When Daniel gave it to me, I just cried and cried. He said I deserved something special after everything I've been through with Tyler." The family was nodding and making appropriate, appreciative noises. Patricia was beaming at her daughter like she'd just announced she'd won the Nobel Prize. Even practical Robert was smiling indulgently at his youngest child. None of them had noticed me standing in the doorway. "It looks perfect on you, sweetheart," Patricia said, reaching over to squeeze Melody's hand. "Daniel always did have excellent taste in jewelry." That's when Melody looked up and saw me. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened in a little of surprise, and her hand, my ring still glittering on her finger, flew to her throat in a gesture of shock. The rest of the family followed her gaze, turning to see me standing there like an avenging angel in their domestic paradise. The comfortable chatter died instantly, replaced by a silence so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Celeste!" Patricia exclaimed, her face brightening with genuine pleasure. "What a wonderful surprise. Daniel didn't tell us you were coming. Sit down, dear, I'll get you a plate." She started to rise from her chair, but I held up a hand to stop her. My eyes were locked on Melody, who was trying to hide her left hand under the table. "I'm not staying for dinner," I said, my voice calm and steady in a way that surprised even me. "I'm just here to get something that belongs to me." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably, and Marcus exchanged a worried look with his wife. Little Emma, oblivious to the adult tension, continued happily smashing her vegetables. "What do you mean, dear?" Patricia asked, though her smile was becoming strained around the edges. I stepped fully into the room, my gaze never leaving Melody's increasingly pale face. "I mean the engagement ring that my husband stole from my jewelry box and gave to your daughter." The words hit the room like a bomb. Patricia's hand flew to her chest, Robert's face went from pleasant confusion to thunderous anger, and Marcus actually choked on his wine. Jennifer quickly picked up Emma and whispered something about getting her cleaned up, clearly wanting to remove the child from what was about to become a very adult confrontation. "Celeste," Melody began, her voice trembling, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't." The single word came out with such force that Melody actually flinched. "Don't you dare lie to me. Not now. Not when I can see my grandmother's ring on your finger." Patricia looked back and forth between us, her maternal instincts clearly torn between protecting her daughter and understanding what had happened. "Melody, what is she talking about?" Melody's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Under the table, I could see her fumbling with the ring, trying to work it off her finger. But her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't manage it. Daniel said." She stammered. "Daniel said what?" Robert's voice boomed across the table. As a lawyer, he had excellent instincts for when someone was lying, and right now those instincts were screaming. "Melody Rebecca Morrison, what did your brother give you?" The use of her full name, something Robert only did when he was truly angry, made Melody crumble. Tears started streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup and making her look younger than her 25 years. "He said it was okay," she wailed. "He said Celeste didn't really wear it anymore, and that she wouldn't mind if I had something beautiful to cheer me up after Tyler broke up with me." The confession hung in the air like toxic smoke. I heard Patricia gasp, and Robert's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. Marcus, who had just returned to the table after helping Jennifer with Emma, stopped dead in his tracks. "He said I didn't wear it anymore." My voice was deadly quiet. "Melody, That ring hasn't left my hand since the day Daniel proposed to me. The only reason it wasn't on my finger this week is because I took it off to do some heavy cleaning and left it on my dresser, where apparently my husband decided it was his to give away. I walked around the table slowly, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor like a countdown to Judgment Day. Melody shrank back in her chair as I approached, but there was nowhere for her to go. "Give me my ring back," I said simply. I can't get it off," she whispered, still tugging uselessly at the band. "Then let me help you," I said, reaching for her hand. Melody jerked away from me like I was on fire. "Don't touch me." The dramatic reaction was so typical of her that I almost laughed. Even in the middle of being caught red-handed with stolen goods, she was trying to play the victim. "Melody," Robert's voice cut through her theatrics like a blade, "give Celeste her ring back. Right now." "Daddy." "Right now." The authority in his voice was absolute. Robert Morrison hadn't built a successful law practice by accepting excuses or tolerating lies, and he certainly wasn't going to start with his own daughter. Melody knew that tone, and she knew better than to argue with it. With shaking hands, she worked the ring off her finger. It took several attempts, and I noticed she'd had to use soap or lotion to get it on in the first place. The ring was actually too small for her, another indication of how thoughtlessly this whole thing had been done. When she finally managed to remove it, she held it out to me with trembling fingers. I took it from her, and the familiar weight of the platinum band in my palm was like coming home after a long, terrible journey. But I wasn't done yet. "I want to hear you say it," I said, slipping the ring back onto my own finger where it belonged. "I want you to tell your family what you did." Melody's tears were flowing freely now, leaving dark mascara tracks down her cheeks. "Celeste, please. Say it." The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Everyone was staring at Melody, waiting for her confession. She began, then stopped and tried again. "I took your engagement ring." "You took my engagement ring and pretended it was a gift," I prompted. "I took your engagement ring and pretended it was a gift," she repeated in a whisper. "And you wore it to a family dinner, showing it off like it was yours." "I wore it to family dinner and showed it off like it was mine." Patricia was crying now too, her face buried in her hands. Robert looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. Marcus was staring at his sister like he'd never seen her before. But I still wasn't finished. "And you knew it was wrong," I continued relentlessly. "You knew that ring wasn't yours to take, and you knew I would be looking for it. You knew, and you did it anyway." Melody's sobs were getting louder, but I felt no pity. This woman had participated in one of the cruelest betrayals I'd ever experienced. She could cry all she wanted. It wouldn't change what she'd done. "Yes," she finally gasped. "I knew it was wrong. I knew it wasn't mine. I knew you'd be looking for it. But I wanted it so badly, and Daniel said." "Daniel said what?" "Cut her off. That it was okay to steal from me. That my feelings didn't matter. That our marriage meant so little that he could give away symbols of it like party favors." The front door slammed, and I heard rapid footsteps in the hallway. Daniel appeared in the doorway, breathing hard like he'd run from the car. His hair was disheveled, his shirt untucked, and his face was flushed with panic. "Celeste," he panted, "thank God you're here. We need to talk about this." "Talk." I turned to face my husband, and whatever he saw in my expression made him take a step backward. "We're way past talking, Daniel. We're at the part where you explain to your family how you betrayed your wife." Daniel's eyes darted around the room, taking in his sister's tear-streaked face, his parents' expressions of horrified disappointment, and his brother's obvious disgust. He opened his mouth several times, but no words came out. "Tell them," I said. "Tell them how you went into our bedroom, took my engagement ring from my dresser, and gave it to your sister because she was sad about her boyfriend. Tell them how you violated every promise you made to me on our wedding day." "It wasn't like that," Daniel finally managed to say. Melody was so upset, and she just needed something to make her feel better. So you gave her my grandmother's ring. My voice was flat, emotionless. The ring that's been in my family for 3 generations. The ring that my grandmother, who survived the Depression and 2 wars and the death of her first husband, passed down to me as a symbol of enduring love and commitment. You gave it to your sister like a consolation prize. Patricia stood up from the table so abruptly her chair fell over backward. Daniel Marcus Morrison, she said, her voice shaking with rage. How could you do such a thing? The use of his full name, the same treatment Melody had received, made Daniel wince. Patricia continued, her voice growing stronger as her anger built. That ring represents Celeste's family history, her connection to her grandmother, her marriage to you. It's not a toy to be passed around when someone has hurt feelings. Mom, please. Daniel began. Don't Mom please me. Patricia's voice rose to a pitch I'd never heard from her before. This is the most selfish, thoughtless, cruel thing I have ever heard of. And from my own son. Robert stood up as well, his face grave. Daniel, I'm ashamed of you. I raised you better than this. We all make mistakes, Daniel tried desperately. Mistakes. I laughed, but it was a bitter sound. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk from the store. A mistake is double booking dinner plans. This wasn't a mistake, Daniel. This was a choice. You chose your sister's temporary happiness over your wife's feelings. You chose to betray our marriage rather than tell Melody, no, for once in her spoiled life. The words hit their target. Daniel flinched as if I'd struck him, and Melody's sobs grew even louder. I'm sorry, Daniel said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Celeste. I know I messed up. You didn't mess up, I corrected him. You made a calculated decision to prioritize someone else over your wife. And the worst part is, you would have let me keep looking for that ring forever if I hadn't pressed you about it tonight. The room fell silent except for Melody's crying. Even little Emma, who had wandered back into the dining room despite her mother's efforts to keep her away, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation and stayed quiet. I looked around the table at this family that had once felt like my own. Patricia, who had taught me to make her famous lasagna and listened to me vent about difficult students. Robert, who had given me legal advice when I bought my first car and walked me down the aisle when my own father couldn't. Marcus, who had become the brother I'd never had. And Jennifer, who had become one of my closest friends. And Daniel, the man I had loved enough to promise forever to. I want you all to understand something, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. This isn't just about a ring. This is about respect. This is about boundaries. This is about the fact that I have apparently been married to a man who thinks so little of me and our marriage that he can give away precious family heirlooms without even consulting me. I turned to address Daniel directly. You didn't just give away my ring tonight, Daniel. You gave away my trust. You gave away my respect. You gave away any faith I had in your ability to put our marriage first. Daniel's face crumpled. Celeste, please don't say that. We can work through this. Can we? Yes. Can we work through the fact that when your sister wanted something that belonged to me, you gave it to her without a second thought? Can we work through the fact that you were prepared to let me tear our house apart looking for that ring rather than admit what you'd done? Can we work through the fact that even now, even after being caught, your first instinct was to minimize what you did by calling it just a ring? Each question was like a hammer blow, and I could see the hope draining from Daniel's face with every word. I love you, he whispered, tears streaming down his face now. I love you more than anything, Celeste. I made a terrible mistake, but I love you. For a moment, looking at his broken expression, I almost wavered. This was the man who had held me when my mother died. The man who had supported me through graduate school and celebrated every small victory in my teaching career. The man who made me laugh until my sides hurt and who knew exactly how I liked my coffee in the morning. But love wasn't enough anymore. Love isn't just a feeling, Daniel, I said quietly. Love is a choice you make every day. Love is putting your partner's needs before your own. Love is protecting what matters to them, even when it seems silly or unimportant to you. Love is saying no to other people when saying yes would hurt the person you married. I looked down at my ring, the diamond catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows across the wall. My grandmother told me something when she gave me this ring. She said that the metal might tarnish and the stones might chip, but real love endures everything. She was wrong about one thing though. Love can't endure being taken for granted. Love can't survive betrayal. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Melody had stopped crying, sensing that something final and irreversible was happening. "I'm going to stay at my sister's house tonight," I announced. "And tomorrow I'm going to call a lawyer." Patricia gasped, and Daniel's face went white as paper. "Celeste, please," he started. "You made your choice," I said simply. "Now I'm making mine." I started to walk toward the door, but Robert's voice stopped me. "Celeste." I turned to look at the man who had become like a father to me. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry for what my children did to you. You deserved so much better from this family." The kindness in his voice almost broke my composure, but I managed to hold myself together. "Thank you, Robert. That means more to me than you know." Patricia had gotten up from the table and was walking toward me. For a moment, I thought she might try to convince me to stay, to work things out with Daniel. Instead, she wrapped me in a fierce hug. "You're a good woman, Celeste," she whispered in my ear. "You're strong and smart and kind, and you deserve a man who treats you like the precious gift you are. I'm ashamed of my son, and I'm heartbroken to lose you, but I understand why you have to go." The hug lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like a goodbye to the family I'd thought would be mine forever. As I reached the door, I turned back one final time. Daniel was slumped in his chair like a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Melody was staring at the table, no longer crying but looking utterly defeated. Marcus and Jennifer were holding hands, their faces sad but unsurprised. I got the feeling this wasn't the first time Melody's selfishness had caused family drama. "For what it's worth," I said, addressing the room in general, "I really did love being part of this family. I wish things could have been different." And with that, I walked out of the Morrison house for the last time. The drive to my sister Rachel's house was a blur of streetlights and unshed tears. I managed to hold myself together until I pulled into her driveway, and then the dam burst. I sat in my car, sobbing until my chest ached and my eyes were swollen nearly shut. My phone had been buzzing constantly with calls and texts from Daniel, but I couldn't bear to look at them. Every vibration felt like another knife twist in an already gaping wound. Rachel must have seen my car from her window, because she came outside before I could even compose myself enough to walk to her door. She took one look at my tear-streaked face and immediately wrapped me in her arms. "What happened?" she asked, but I could only shake my head and cry harder. She led me inside, settled me on her couch with a cup of tea, and waited patiently while I told her the whole horrible story. By the time I finished, Rachel was pacing her living room like a caged tiger, her own anger on my behalf blazing in her eyes. "I'm going to kill him," she said simply. "I'm going to kill him, and then I'm going to kill her, and then I'm going to kill him again for good measure." Despite everything, her protective fury made me smile for the first time that evening. "Get in line," I said weakly. Rachel sat down beside me and took my hands in hers. "Celeste, I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself. What you did tonight took incredible courage." "It didn't feel courageous," I admitted. "It felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest." "That's what made it brave," she said. "Courage isn't the absence of fear or pain. It's doing what's right despite the fear and pain." We talked until nearly 3 in the morning, Rachel alternately holding me while I cried and fantasizing about increasingly creative punishments for Daniel and Melody. By the time I finally fell asleep on her guest room bed, I was emotionally drained but strangely at peace. I had my ring back. I had my dignity intact. And I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal consultations, apartment hunting, and the painful process of disentangling a 4-year marriage. Daniel called constantly at first, leaving voicemails that ranged from desperate apologies to angry accusations that I was overreacting. Melody tried reaching out too, sending long text messages about how sorry she was and how she'd never meant for things to go so far. I blocked them both. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward, helped by the fact that we'd kept most of our finances separate and had no children together. Daniel didn't contest anything, perhaps understanding that he had no moral ground to stand on. The hardest part was the reaction from mutual friends. Some people understood immediately why I'd left. These were mostly women who had their own stories of being taken for granted or having their boundaries violated by partners who should have protected them. Others, particularly some of Daniel's college friends, seemed to think I was overreacting to what they called a simple misunderstanding. "It's just a ring," one of them said at a coffee shop where I'd agreed to meet with Daniel's best friend, hoping he might help Daniel understand why I'd left. "Surely your marriage is worth more than a piece of jewelry." I looked at this man, someone I'd considered a friend for years, and realized he would never understand. To him, and to Daniel, and to anyone who thought like them, the ring was just an object. They couldn't see what it represented: trust, respect, consideration, love itself. "You're right," I told him calmly. "My marriage was worth more than a piece of jewelry. That's exactly why I ended it. I'm sitting in my new apartment, a cozy one-bedroom place with hardwood floors and large windows that let in streams of golden morning light. It's smaller than the house I shared with Daniel, but it's mine in a way that place never was. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every book on the shelves reflects my tastes and no one else's. My grandmother's ring sits in a place of honor on my nightstand, catching the morning sun and throwing tiny rainbows across the white walls. I don't wear it anymore. It carries too many complicated memories now, but I love seeing it there, a reminder of the strength and resilience that runs in my family. I've heard through mutual friends that Daniel and Melody's relationship has become strained since that night. Apparently, the rest of the family blamed her for the destruction of my marriage, and Daniel himself seemed to finally understand the magnitude of what he'd lost. He'd started therapy, someone told me, trying to work through his inability to set boundaries with his family. Too little, too late. As for Melody, she'd reportedly been cut off financially by her parents and forced to get a job for the first time in her adult life. The drama of that night had apparently been a wake-up call for Patricia and Robert about how their enabling had created a spoiled, selfish young woman who thought she was entitled to anything she wanted. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, only a distant sort of sadness for the family that might have been. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "Coffee later? I want to hear about your date last night." I smiled, thinking about Michael, the kind, funny librarian I'd met at a bookstore reading 3 weeks ago. We'd had dinner the night before, a simple, uncomplicated evening of good food and better conversation. He was nothing like Daniel. Quieter, more thoughtful, content to let conversations develop naturally rather than filling every silence with words. When he'd walked me to my car, he'd noticed my ring. I'd started wearing it again recently, not as an engagement ring but as a tribute to my grandmother's memory. "That's beautiful," he'd said. "It looks like it has a story." "It does," I'd replied. "It's about a woman who understood that love should make you stronger, not smaller." He'd nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. As I got ready for work, I'd taken a new job at a private school where my colleagues appreciated my dedication and creativity. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was different from the one who'd walked into the Morrison family dining room 6 months ago. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, and a set to her jaw that spoke of hard-won wisdom. She was stronger now, clearer about her worth, less willing to accept less than she deserved. Some betrayals cut so deep, they changed the very foundation of who you thought you were, I said to my reflection, remembering the words I'd spoken that first night. But sometimes I'd learned that change was exactly what you needed. I picked up my grandmother's ring from the nightstand, held it up to catch the morning light one more time, then carefully placed it back in its spot. Today, like every day since I'd reclaimed it, it would stay here, not hidden away in shame, but displayed proudly as a symbol of everything I'd survived and everything I'd learned about the true meaning of love. My marriage to Daniel was over, but my story was just beginning. And this time I was the one writing it. As I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, I couldn't help but smile. The autumn air was crisp and full of possibilities, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Some stories end with reconciliation and forgiveness. Some end with dramatic revenge and comeuppance. But the best stories, the truest ones, end with a woman who knows her worth, walking confidently into whatever comes next, head held high and heart finally free. That's the ending my grandmother would have wanted for me. That's the ending I chose for myself. Thank you for watching. If you want more videos like this, please like, subscribe and share.